My name is Carlos, and my claim of fact is not implementing the draft in time of war causes disparities between socioeconomic classes more prevalent. And to pretty much define this claim of fact, I'm using my secondary claims of, in time of war, statistics show that enlisted servicemen come from more of a lower socioeconomic class rather than more higher socioeconomic class. Also, I'm going to give you some grounds for me to validate that supporting claim, and by doing so, I will lead to the fact that the draft makes it more equally for everyone to fight for the country that is decided to go to war, rather than just having having just one sect of people, one demographic of people fighting for someone else's decision. So, in high school, most people come to the question of, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to college, I'm going to start working, or I'm going to join the military. So I looked up in the Social Science Quarterly, a journal that was written by Meredith Clay Camp of Princeton University, titled College, Jobs, or the Military. And in her case study, she pretty much concludes that in voluntary military enlistment during wartime is associated more with socioeconomic class. I wanted to validate this case study, so I looked into different zip codes in California in particular, because that's easier for us to associate with since we live in California. And according to Forbes magazine, the zip code of 90210, which is Beverly Hills, it made it in the top 5 in the most expensive zip codes in the whole country. So I wanted to compare this zip code to something that's not as high in socioeconomic class status. So I decided to go with Marietta, which is 92563 zip code. I decided to go with this exact zip code because the numbers are relatively close. According to 2000 U.S. Census, the Beverly Hills population is 33,784, when the Marietta population is 44,282. They're not exactly the same, but it's a better comparison when I try to compare to Beverly Hills and Pomona, Pomona has like 4 times the amount of population. So on the statistics I got from the U.S. Census Bureau, which from 2000, I got that the zip code of 90210 had no data recognizing anyone who enlisted. So I used the zip code of 90211, which is still considered a Beverly Hills zip code, and is still accounted for in the 33,000 population I mentioned earlier. In this zip code, the data that the census collected showed that 0% of active duty men were Hispanic, 0% were black, and 0% were white. The 0% doesn't technically mean that no one from Beverly Hills served in the military, but what it does show you is that the people who did get this question asked to them, they didn't have any answer for that. They didn't have any answer as in, yes, I served. So it just shows you that it's less common in an area like Beverly Hills. When you look at the Marietta zip code in 92563, it is shown in the same Census Bureau of 2000 that 28% of 28% of men who enlisted in the Army as active duty were Hispanic, and 20% of them were black. So this shows you that it's more prevalent in places like Marietta for someone to join the military rather than someone in Beverly Hills to join the military. So by getting this data, I also tried to, I saw that article by journalist Anna Merline, something like that. She wrote in U.S. News and World Report an article titled "Slumping Economy Boosts Military Recruitment." In this article, she interviewed Sergeant Gary Jolly, who was a recruiting officer, and he's quoted to say, on average, 1 recruit every 2 weeks used to be the normal, but now with slumping economy, 2 recruits walk in every week. So when you look at the fact that with the slumping economy and places that are more affected and more economically affected, the recruitment of military raises, and in places where they're not economically affected, recruitment stays relatively to 0. So by implementing a draft, implementing a draft makes it more so that the U.S. people are treated more equally in all demographics rather than just one set. So, yeah, that's my kind of fact.
All right, Carlos, the propositions identified, the phrasing's a little awkward. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by more prevalent at the end of the proposition. So I think you need to, and for instance, you're kind of saying that it causes disparities in the classes, and I'm not, there's disparity in the recruitment in the classes, but what the harm is from that is not particularly clear. On your secondary issues, they need to be a little bit more declarative statements. I didn't think that they were as clear as they needed to be. Internal structure, I think, is problematic because you kind of get bogged down in all your numbers, and I'm not always sure that you're making a very clear declarative claim. You're going through this explanation of how you did things. Now, the one thing I really liked is the fact that you're trying to find some creative ways of getting information about recruitment in different categories. I like the idea of the comparison between the zip codes. I think that's an interesting way of going about it. But you do want to be careful about the assumptions that you make there. For instance, it might have less to do with the economic disparities than it does political realities of where people live. You might have a different, I mean, let's face it, Beverly Hills is probably a more liberal environment. Murrieta's in a more conservative environment. Conservatives are more likely to serve, so maybe it's got less to do with the economics and more to do with the political ideology that's going on there. The other thing is that when you do the racial comparison that you get into there, I'm not exactly sure what the percentage of blacks and Hispanics in Beverly Hills is, and so that they are not represented by recruits in the Army from Beverly Hills is not all that surprising, and I think maybe you need to make a comparison between areas that are more economically and socially comparable. You've got the right idea on the numbers, but I appreciate the attempt to do that because I thought that that was a good creative way of doing it. I'm just not sure it gets you quite what you want. I think there also needs to be a little bit more explanation about what the consequence of this is. What harm does it produce? Otherwise, you're just describing the fact that the military is made up of people who tend to come from families that are less economically secure, and families that are less economically secure tend to be more in these particular classes. Okay. So why is that a bad thing? That's the part that I think you need to add into the speech. The notion about a draft, for instance, is a kind of a quasi-policy claim that you're saying that if we did this, we'd get this other outcome. Whenever you make a quasi-policy claim like that, it's an invitation for the respondent to talk about what the quasi-policy implications would be of having a draft as a contrast to your position. So it's an invitation for arguments that are not necessarily things that are going to work for your claim, but on other issues. All right, thank you.